Football arrived in Switzerland during the late 1800s, largely through British students, teachers, businessmen, and expatriates. The game quickly spread through schools and universities, particularly in cities such as Basel, Geneva, Lausanne, and Zurich. One of the country's earliest football clubs was FC St. Gallen, founded in 1879. That makes it one of the oldest existing football clubs in continental Europe. Other clubs soon appeared across the country. Football was particularly attractive to young people because it required relatively little equipment and could be played almost anywhere. But Switzerland's geography presented an interesting challenge. The country was divided by mountains, language regions, and strong local identities. French-speaking Switzerland had its own football culture. German-speaking Switzerland had another, and Italian-speaking regions had their own traditions. For football to become a truly national sport, these communities needed to come together. That process accelerated in the late 19th century. In 1895, several clubs came together to establish the Swiss Football Association, known today as the Swiss Football Association, or SFV. The organization helped coordinate competitions and establish common rules across the country. Switzerland also became deeply connected to international football. In 1904, the country was among the founding members of FIFA. That decision would eventually make Switzerland one of the most important countries in world football administration. FIFA would later establish its headquarters in Zurich, strengthening Switzerland's connection to the global game. But on the pitch, Swiss football was also beginning to make an impact. The country's first national championship was organized at the beginning of the 20th century, with FC Zurich becoming the first Swiss champions in 1901. Over the following decades, clubs from Zurich, Basel, Bern, Geneva, and other cities competed for national supremacy. The game continued to grow, and by the 1920s and 1930s, Switzerland was ready to introduce itself to the world. The country's first major international football adventure was about to begin. By the 1930s, Swiss football had developed enough to compete seriously on the international stage. Switzerland qualified for the 1934 FIFA World Cup in Italy, making its debut at the tournament. The Swiss defeated the Netherlands in their opening match, before losing to eventual finalist Czechoslovakia in the quarterfinals. 4 years later, Switzerland returned for the 1938 World Cup in France, and this tournament produced one of the most memorable performances in Swiss football history. Switzerland faced Germany in the first round. The match ended in a draw, forcing a replay. In the second meeting, Switzerland produced a stunning 4-2 victory, eliminating Germany from the tournament. The Swiss eventually reached the quarterfinals, where they were eliminated by Hungary. For a relatively small country, Switzerland had announced itself as a serious football nation. The Second World War disrupted football across Europe. International competitions were suspended, travel became difficult, and many players were affected by military service and the wider conflict. But Swiss football continued. Switzerland's neutrality allowed domestic football to operate more consistently than in many surrounding countries. Local competitions continued, clubs survived, and football remained an important part of everyday life. After the war, Switzerland quickly returned to the international stage. The country hosted the 1954 FIFA World Cup, giving Swiss football one of the biggest opportunities in its history. And remarkably, the tournament produced one of the highest-scoring matches in World Cup history. Switzerland opened the 1954 World Cup with a victory over Italy. But the tournament's most famous Swiss match came in the quarterfinals. The hosts faced Austria in Lausanne. What followed was an extraordinary goal fest. Austria defeated Switzerland 7-5. 12 goals were scored in just 90 minutes, the highest-scoring match in World Cup history. Switzerland had been eliminated, but hosting the tournament helped establish the country as an important footballing nation. The years that followed, however, were more difficult. Switzerland struggled to maintain the success of its early generations and missed several major tournaments. For decades, the national team moved between periods of promise and disappointment. But Swiss football was quietly building something that would eventually change its future: a world-class development system. After the excitement of the 1954 World Cup, Swiss football entered a long period of inconsistency. The national team struggled to qualify for major tournaments, while neighboring countries such as Germany, Italy, and France continued to produce generations of elite players.
But Switzerland wasn't standing still.
Its domestic clubs continued developing young talent, while football became increasingly organized at youth and grassroots level. Clubs such as FC Basel, Grasshopper Club Zurich, Servette, and BSC Young Boys became important pillars of Swiss football. The country's top division also evolved over time, eventually becoming known as the Swiss Super League. And although Switzerland lacked the population of Europe's biggest football nations, it developed an important advantage: a strong system for identifying and developing young players. Swiss clubs also began making their presence felt in European competitions. Grasshopper Club Zurich became one of the country's most successful domestic teams, winning numerous national championships. FC Basel later emerged as a major European success story. The club regularly competed in the UEFA Champions League and Europa League, producing memorable victories against some of Europe's biggest teams. Basel also became famous for developing and showcasing talented young players who would eventually move to larger clubs across Europe. Meanwhile, Young Boys established itself as another major force in Swiss football, particularly in the modern era. These clubs proved that Swiss football could compete internationally, despite operating with far smaller budgets than Europe's wealthiest leagues. But the biggest transformation was happening at national team level. At the beginning of the 21st century, Switzerland began producing an exceptional generation of footballers. Players such as Alexander Frei, Hakan Yakin, Tranquillo Barnetta, and Philippe Senderos helped Switzerland return to the world's biggest tournaments. The national team qualified for the 2006 World Cup, its first appearance at the tournament since 1994. Switzerland reached the round of 16, but were eliminated by Ukraine after a penalty shootout. 4 years later, Switzerland produced one of the biggest shocks of the 2010 World Cup. They defeated eventual champions Spain 1-0 in their opening match. Although Switzerland didn't progress beyond the group stage, the result showed that the Swiss national team could compete with the world's best. And the country's football development system was about to produce an even stronger generation. The success of Switzerland's youth development system became even more obvious during the 2010s. A new generation of players emerged, led by names such as Granit Xhaka, Xherdan Shaqiri, Jan Sommer, Ricardo Rodríguez, and Haris Seferovic. Many developed their careers in Europe's biggest leagues. Xhaka became a key midfielder in both the Bundesliga and Premier League. Shaqiri became one of Switzerland's most recognizable attacking players and won the UEFA Champions League with Liverpool in 2019. Together, they helped Switzerland become a remarkably consistent presence at major tournaments. The country qualified for the 2014, 2018, and 2022 World Cups, while also regularly reaching the knockout stages of the European Championship. One of Switzerland's greatest modern performances came at Euro 2020, played in 2021 after being postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Switzerland faced world champions France in the round of 16. At one point, the Swiss were trailing 3-1 and appeared to be heading home, but they refused to surrender. Late goals from Haris Seferovic and Mario Gavranovic brought Switzerland level. The match went to penalties, and when Switzerland won the shootout, the football world watched in disbelief. It was one of the greatest comebacks in European Championship history. Switzerland eventually reached the quarterfinals, where they lost to Spain on penalties. But the message was clear. Switzerland was no longer simply happy to qualify for major tournaments. It expected to compete. Swiss football has also continued to develop on the women's side. The Switzerland women's national team qualified for its first FIFA Women's World Cup in 2015 and has since become a regular presence at major international competitions. Women's football continues to gain visibility across the country, with more girls entering academies and grassroots programs. Swiss clubs are also investing more heavily in women's teams, helping create a stronger pathway from youth football to the professional level. Switzerland's football story is remarkable. From a game introduced by British expatriates in the 19th century, to the World Cups of the 1930s and 1950s, to decades of disappointment, and finally, to a modern national team capable of challenging Europe's biggest powers. Switzerland may never have the population or financial resources of England, Germany, or France, but it has something just as valuable: a football system built on organization, development, and patience. And that system continues to produce players capable of competing at the highest level. If you enjoyed this journey through Swiss football history, like the video, subscribe, and tell us, can Switzerland ever win a major international trophy? Thanks for watching.
In the morning, I wake up feeling no pain. Long stretches